Guys, thanks so much for your time. I mean, we were just discussing off air. Patricia de Lille just had a press conference regarding water. The water restrictions have been ramped up. I mean, it looks like so far what they've been trying to do to get people to use less water hasn't worked. What's the problem? Dinao, perhaps if I start with you.
Good afternoon. I don't think the problem is so much with the residents or the users so much. It's just infrastructure in itself usually takes very long to implement. It's not something that can be done overnight. And when you look at what are the possible solutions, such as wastewater recycling, what is it that the city can do? What is it that private sector can do? None of those solutions can actually be implemented just overnight. I think a short-term solution, you're looking at anything between 6 to 10 weeks at a minimum to get that going. And even then, that would only be addressing what you can do as a user. We still have other challenges like water leakages. I think the urban water leakage rates at the moment nationally are at about 37%, although Cape Town is a lot less than that. So there are quite a number of challenges in implementing infrastructure to resolve the water challenges, which cannot all be resolved overnight. Yeah.
How long will it take then, and could we possibly see day zero actually being kicked in?
Well, I think, Fifi, that is an absolute possibility if two major things don't happen. Number one, we don't fast track, and I know everyone is making every effort to fast track utilizing the groundwater aquifers that are there in Cape Town. And the second one is that behavior, human behavior changes, consumption behavior changes. If people don't start taking this absolutely seriously throughout the Western Cape, there are still certain users that are consuming more than 200 or 300 litres per person per day. And that is just a disaster for that region. In South Africa alone, water consumption is way ahead of global standards. You know, we consume 60, 70 litres more per day per person in South Africa than anywhere else in the world.
Oh, we don't take French showers, that's why.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I suppose we do smell better as a result, yes. But there is a human behavioural element, and then there's absolutely a need for infrastructure and government and private partnerships to work together to solve this problem. I
mean, before we get to the infrastructure and what needs to be done on that front, I mean, I know before the show started, there was conflicting views over whether people were actually reducing water to levels that they're supposed to be consuming and whether they're not. And Dinao, you believe that many Cape Townians actually are?
I really do believe so. I mean, you know, you would recall in 2016 rather, Gauteng also had a problem of a very mild drought. And there was a lot of awareness, people switched off their sprinklers. So I really believe that Cape Townians are making an effort. And I've also seen it with private sector where they are actually seriously looking for alternative solutions. We are supporting some of them in looking for alternative solutions that can at least get them off grid. To allow them to operate, because business needs to continue for the economy of the city of Cape Town, while at the same time still supporting the city's endeavors of how do we reduce water consumption in that short term. So at a household level, I think it's currently reported that they consume about 87 litres a day. That's probably the lowest in South Africa, given that we haven't had that behavioral change being promoted the same way that we've had it with electricity a couple of years ago. So I do see the improvement. I think it's definitely there. I think the challenge is just, where else does the city and other private sectors need to be making those changes?
Murray, you mentioned, a very complicated process. I think if I simplified it in my mind of getting water out the ground, so fast-tracking that process, what's the hold-up?
Well, there isn't a hold-up. I think the problem is that the process was started too late. So government is working very hard with the private sector to access groundwater. I think there's a couple of issues there. The one is that we don't know how much water there is and whether that water would be sufficient to meet the needs of the city. And secondly, to be able to tap into groundwater, it requires infrastructure. And like Dinao was saying, that you don't just switch that tap on overnight. You actually have to do some work towards it. And the unfortunate reality is that that infrastructure development has come a little too little, too late.
Too late. I know the city of Cape Town recently flighted a green bond on the JSE. There's a number of initiatives there to raise money in order to fund some of these infrastructure backlogs. Is that too little, too late? Essentially, that's what you guys are saying.
I think that's what we're saying, Fifi. You know, usually to plan infrastructure and implement it, you looking at about 3 to 4 years at a time, depending on how complex the infrastructure is. The city of Cape Town last year, you would have seen they were issuing quite a lot of inquiries for desalination. And you do have some short-term solutions like your mobile plants that you can literally plug, but you still have some infrastructure that you have to build to connect to that. And that takes quite a while. They are also looking at the moment at wastewater recycling out of their own wastewater treatment plants. Now, to investigate those options and then find the right contractors and decide even on the procurement method, are you going to do it using your own funds or are you going to go the public-private partnership route? That in itself also takes a while.
Are you guys is private sector having conversations with government or government with private sector about those partnerships and, you know, what needs to be put on the table in order to alleviate this very serious problem?
Absolutely. In fact, those conversations have been going on for years. And really, I think it's just the logjam in the process of getting approvals. Like Dinao was saying, the procurement processes are onerous. But I think we need to be realistic in South Africa at the moment. And the realism says that we're not going to have an absolute short-term solution for the Cape Town problem. Day zero is approaching.
What does that mean for the rest of South Africa?
And that's exactly the point I'd like to make, is that for the rest of us, we can't just look at the Cape Town problem and see it in isolation. South Africans as a whole need to look at their behavior around water. And we need to, there needs to be an absolute paradigm shift in how each one of us treats and views water. And that paradigm shift means that we all need to use less. We need to implement grey water treatment systems in our homes and in our businesses and in the hospitals and the hotels and everything where water consumption is high. And most importantly, we're going to see tariff adjustments to water across the country.
Sure, and I know Cape Townians are already fighting that those tariffs are too high, but we'll have to leave it there. We'll catch up. Obviously, the story is far from over. Thanks so much for your time. That was Mari Chabant, who's a YPO, a member and a director of Alula Water, as well as Dinao Lerutla, who's the CEO of Alula Water.